see, that's the starting point. What Rudolf Steiner describes is that when the seed for individualized ego consciousness is placed into the astral body of the human being during the moon phase of earthly incarnation, that this posed a threat to, that there was a danger that the human being would separate completely from the spiritual world. That danger is inscribed in the Mercury sphere. So, fast forward to Earth incarnation. And else, I guess I'll go at it this way. When Rudolf Steiner lays the foundation stone into the hill at Dornach as the foundation for the building of the first Goetheanum, and he places this document that ends with the statement that this is done when Mercury, as evening star, stood in the sign of Libra, the balance, tropical zodiac. What I think he's doing there is now also, as a spiritual initiate, inscribing the balance to that threat. And that this deed, this gesture of laying this foundation stone and attempting to build this structure as the home for the human spirit on the earth is an answer to that threat, that the human being may separate from the spiritual world. Now we've got to go back to the time of the beginning of the Copernican Revolution. And in the book, The Secret Stream, there's a lecture there, and I have it in my bedroom and I meant to share it with you, Jill, that Rudolf Steiner describes how at the time that this thought was coming, that the earth was no longer at the center, Christian Rosenkreuz had a meeting. And that this meeting was attended not only by those who were physically incarnate on the earth, but by those spiritual beings, or those who had already crossed into the spiritual world that still had the earth as the focus for their attention and activity, including the Buddha, who had already attained enlightenment but was still in the service of the earth. And that at this meeting, what was attempted was trying to understand, where is this thought coming from? This thought that the earth is not at the center. Where does someone get that idea? And there's not a description of how they arrived at this, but what is arrived at is that the thought was coming from Mars. That there was a crisis in the Mars sphere, and that souls, certain souls, as they were incarnating, were picking this up as they were coming toward earthly incarnation. And that in order to address that crisis, Christian Rosenkreuz, I'm using a very crude language to describe this, but there is this agreement that the Buddha, who in my understanding didn't go through the moon phase of earthly incarnation, so didn't experience this falling away or this threat, is as asked to move or makes the decision, I don't know how quite to verbiage that, to move his sphere of activity to Mars, and there to perform a deed, a sacrifice, much like the deed of the Christ, through the mystery of Golgotha with the earth. And that in this way, as the souls are incarnating through the Mars sphere, now they can, not only would they perchance pick up this thought, that they could also encounter the compassion and the teaching of the Buddha, so that one can be a meditant in life and not have to go off in a cave somewhere, and so that there would not be two separate streams, those who only cultivate spiritual consciousness and those who only believe in the reality of the physical material world, that we can be engaged in the physical material world and develop spiritual consciousness. So I think that when this happens, when the Buddha moves to Mars, the Venus sphere that he had inhabited, which was closer to the sun, moves over and embraces the earth.
Wow.
To say that. Also, Mercury could quite possibly mean, in order to make it make sense, that which is closest to the center. If the Earth is at the center, I have to get over the moon because it's part of the Earth, the thing going around it that's closest is Mercury. If the Earth is no longer at the center, then the thing that's closest to what we regard as center, the sun, then that's Mercury. But I think it also has to do with this deed of the Buddha moving to Mars. And I'm not far into that research, it's just an idea. But there's also something happening in our time now that has to do with Jupiter. And in 1994, okay, let me back up. It takes, in the human biography, it's shared through anthroposophy that in the 49th year you enter the Jupiter sphere. And so it takes 49 years to get there, just to say it roughly. And in 1994, July, I'm going to say 15th, the comet Shoemaker-Levy burst into bits and smashed into the face of Jupiter. This was exactly 49 years, almost to the day, that through the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb was first tested. So it's 49 years, it's a Jupiter rhythm. 49 years later, Jupiter gets smashed into by this comet, this fragmentation. So I've been living with this question, kind of like with this Mars thing. Is there a crisis now happening because of what we've done on the Earth? Is there something happening with Jupiter? And if souls are incarnating through the Jupiter sphere, are they, is there this fragmentation that's being experienced? And is this what's resulting in autism, and dyslexia, and these things that we are encountering? I really, going way out there. Is it just trying to understand how we related to this? Because there was a total solar eclipse before the atomic bomb was tested. Fortunately for us as a humanity, because what happens during a solar eclipse is that the unbridled will forces of the human being stream out into a larger space and work themselves out. But eventually we have to deal with it. But because it was a solar eclipse, the effect of that didn't just stay tight in this one spot, it moved out. And so 49 years later, you could say it's a coincidence. I wasn't looking for it, I was making a calendar. I was looking for, here's an interesting thing to put on this day. That's exactly 49 years, it's Jupiter, oh my gosh, what do they have to do? And I, for me, who I am as a researcher, that I will be looking for something else and I'll be, you gotta look over there. And that really is how you come to understanding these incongruities. Okay, maybe the tropical works in this moment, and the sidereal works over here. It really is trusting that there is a relationship and a guidance, and if you seek it, it will show itself. That's been my experience, years and years, keeping a journal and going back and forth. Looking at the planetary conjunctions, looking at when the sun is in a particular constellation, reviewing my life, trying not to get stuck in the past, but just to look at it objectively. Oh, Venus is going to be in the same spot that it was the last time it did that. What was going on? To really try to cultivate this relationship. We're not all going to do that, but it's available to us to do that. So and it was known both esoterically and exoterically that the names switched. It wasn't
exoterically too?
Yes, and it's
So were days of the week, are they based on the new, with Friday being Venus?
Rudolf Steiner used both, and I haven't read enough of Steiner to say, there's where he's talking about Mercury that we know as Mercury, and there's where he's talking about Mercury that we know as Venus. Again, like the tropical and the sidereal, it gets confusing. So I think when you talk about the human biography, And you say, first 7 years Moon, next 7 years Mercury. It's something other than what we say is the planet Mercury that we're seeing out there. But then we get attached. It's like, wait, no, I want them to be Venus because I've got all these other things built around Venus. So we really have to deal with ourselves and where we get stuck and where we get attached. And what does it serve for us to get stuck on something? It's helping consciousness to develop. So we went through a lot of confusion.
So I had asked this question earlier in an individual conversation. I'm happy to still wait. But we really talked a lot about the stars and the sun. And I'm wondering about the moon.
The moon.
Because it's been my experience, having moved from so much of my life in the north to come here to Florida, and especially where our school is, it's much more South Florida, right near the tip of the peninsula. And the influence of the moon is so strongly felt. And I'm just wanting to understand it better, because...
So there is a moon zodiac. The moon is, as Rudolf Steiner says, it's not only reflecting to us the light of the sun, it's reflecting the entire cosmos while keeping itself hidden. Although the moon is closest to us, as a spiritual being, it is what we know least about. The beings of the moon don't let anyone know that you have to be in the right mood of soul to learn the secrets of the moon. And Rudolf Steiner also describes that the full moon has a shattering effect, breaks down what's formed and stuck. So you think about full moonlight, it's romantic, but really it's breaking things apart. I think that the presence of the water is probably amplifying it, because the moon does have a relationship to the waters and fluid element on the earth. And it's also setting up the rhythm for how the other planets engage with the earth. Because the moon, encircling the earth, is kind of serving as a guardian. Anything trying to come into the earth sphere has to come through the moon. And anything from the earth sphere seeking the spiritual cosmos has to go through the moon. So the rhythm of the moon is really, really important in that process. I don't have this memorized. Synodic period, there's several different periods of the moon. And one of them is 29.5, which is the rhythm of Saturn. It's 29.5 days with the moon, but it's 29.5 years with Saturn. And then each of the planets in between is also related to that 29.5 rhythm in their orbits. So there's a harmony existing between all the planets and the moon, how to relate to what's happening on the planet. I don't know if it addresses it, but I do have the images of the moon created by Margot Rosser, the moon going through the Zodiac. And they look, you can see some of the same motif going throughout with each of the planets. But it is a different gesture in a different sense. And also probably because you have a strong relationship to horizon when you're at the end of a peninsula. And the moon appears much larger at the horizon. It tries to rival the sun. It may be dark enough for us to see something outside that put everybody to sleep.